It's time once again to step out, step up, and step into the Coming Out Lounge, a safe space to be you and your truth with coming out coach Rick Clemens. Rick's expertise in the coming out process has helped hundreds of men and women ignite their inner desires to powerfully step out of the closet and into the light of living authentically as gays and lesbians. Freeing you from the feelings of guilt or shame, Rick offers take-action tips for basking in the glow of self-love, easy-to-implement tools for wrapping yourself up in the warm embrace of self-acceptance, and take-it-to-the-bank advice on how to step courageously into a powerful, purpose-filled life on the other side of the closet doors. Each week, the Coming Out Lounge brings you heartwarming coming out stories, insights for living authentically as a gay or lesbian, and challenges you to step out of the ordinary and into your extraordinary life. Pull up a chair, cuddle up with the truth of who you've always been, and let's spend an hour in the Coming Out Lounge discovering how to energetically step out, step up, and step into living your truth. Here's the host of your show, Coming Out Coach Rick.
Hello, Closet Busters. It is time once again to stop the closet dwelling and to step out, step up, and step into living your truth. And today we're going to be talking about something that's really about living spiritual truths. We want to get you out of that spiritual trauma that you may be finding yourself in, whether you've been out of the closet for a while or you're just beginning to step forward into that space of going through those closet doors. And so today I brought somebody pretty special on board to kind of help me dissect how this all looks on that front of spirituality and spiritual trauma. And I guess the best way to kind of start to introduce this cool guy is to kind of take you through what he went through. You know, he kind of has fatherhood, yoga, meditation, naked men's yoga groups, all this stuff going on. So it's kind of like, what does all that have to do with spiritual trauma? Well, some would say they are a means to an end, and others would say, and I think my guest would actually even say this, that all that stuff is kind of the culmination of his continuing journey to becoming deeply spiritually aligned. Now, Darren Main was raised by a Catholic mother and an agnostic father, and that journey led him through some drugs and sex-filled days where he kind of thought he'd found God in that place, but what he discovered was that was really a temporary reprieve that ultimately ended up leading to greater suffering. And so shortly after his 18th birthday, he, like many of us, hit rock bottom. We hit rock bottom in our own ways. And that was when everything began to, as he says in his own words, begin to have his ego unbuckle, and everything was underneath this huge weight of guilt and shame. But that's also when he started to make the turn. He reached a point where he knew it was either life or death, and thankfully for himself and his son that he now has, and the rest of us, he was able to choose life and walk forward. So today Darren's going to walk us through different ways to be more spiritually alive and to step through that spiritual trauma that we face in our lives, whether we're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, or of course even heterosexual. We all have this spiritual trauma to walk through. Welcome to the podcast, my friend Darren Main. Hey, Darren, how are you?
I'm great. That's quite the intro. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome, man. Well, okay, so I'm going to confess most of that came from you-know-where, your own website, but I like to just and paint the pictures in the way I see it fit together. So,
everybody's got a blog these days.
Yes, we all do. We all do. And crazy as it is, I'm about to start another one, and I'm like, okay, I've already got 5 going. What am I thinking here right now? But it's all good. So you're a yoga guy, you're a meditation guy, you facilitate workshops, you run some naked men's yoga groups. You're also a dad. So, man, all of this came about through some pretty deep stuff you've gone through in your life, which I kind of alluded to in the intro. But why don't you give us your version, your little version of how you came to this place where you really, truly walked through your own spiritual trauma to become to this kind of centered space in your life.
Yeah, well, I guess like most LGBT people, we all have our own story. It's always a unique story, and yet there are certain common threads that seem to run through all of them, and one is the guilt and the shame that is thrust upon us by the secular world. Mm-hmm. and then of course by the religious world, whatever religion you were raised in, there's a good chance there was some amount of guilt and shame infused into that experience. And that was certainly true for me. And so I think, like most young gay men, especially growing up in the 70s, which was a very different time than it is today, we couldn't even fathom something like marriage equality at the time. We would just be happy not to get beat up or called just really awful names. And so I think coming out of that experience, the way I describe it is, if I were to hit you over the head with a rolling pin, you wouldn't really call it a cooking utensil, you'd call it a weapon. And I think most of us were hit over the head with instruments that should be instruments of compassion and forgiveness and kindness and love. But when you're hit over the head with it and it's wielded as a weapon, we tend to carry that with us through life. And so, like most LGBT people, I sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater. I said, you know what? All that God stuff, that spiritual stuff, that Jesus stuff, not for me. No interest. I think I'm going to go get laid instead. And that was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Of course
did it for a long time. And of course I did a lot of drugs early on as well. And when I got clean and sober, my sponsor said, you need to find a higher power. And I got my hackles all up and pushed and pushed and pushed. And finally he said, look, you either need to find a higher power or you need to find a new sponsor. And so I thought, fine. What's going to freak my mother out the most? That's got to be the best one for me. And that's when I wandered into a yoga class. And I sort of did it almost as an act of rebellion because it freaked my mother out, who was very conservative and Catholic at the time. But what I found was I sort of came home to myself. And what I also found is that I sort of returned to the scene of the crime, in the sense that all of my guilt and shame was body-centric. I was told over and over again from all these different angles that my body and its natural desires were shameful and something to feel guilty about. And here I step into a yoga class. Now I see the brilliance of it. But at the time, it was sort of one of those accidents or miracles or whatever, where it was just the absolute perfect thing for me to start celebrating my body. And to do it in little ways that were not threatening in the beginning. You know, I wasn't thinking about my sexuality. I was thinking about touching my toes. But that gave me like a little doorway into, okay, I can make peace with my body. I can make peace with my body when it's healthy and when it's not healthy, when it's balanced and when it's not. And I can learn to trust my body. When it says this is too much, I can stop or back off. And when it tells me I can go a little further. And so as I learned to trust my body, it gave me permission to explore my sexuality in a way that was a celebratory experience instead of shaming. If you will.
Yeah. Well, I think for so many of us, that is the piece that, and I'm sure those that are listening that are maybe just starting to go through the process or sitting in the corner of the closet, not even close to putting their handle on the door right now, this body shaming piece is huge. It's not just, you can be the most fit, beautiful specimen in the world, but you layer gay or bisexual or lesbian or transgender on top of that body, and shame and guilt are like right there ready to pounce right on top. I mean, it's just the way our world is. Thankfully, things are beginning to shift, but even with the shift in gay marriage and things such as that, I think we're going to encounter more of this shaming before it gets better, because people are now going to fight to find every which way they can to shame those of us of the gay and lesbian persuasion, because we kind of, quote, won at this juncture, so to speak.
Well, I also think, and this is not to minimize the incredible strides we've made over the past 40 years or so, but The one thing, we're sort of like the dog that caught the car, in that we've been chasing after these things that are very important, like marriage equality, and transgender rights. I mean, things like Caitlyn Jenner coming out and being largely celebrated for it.
Right.
And this leaves us with the awkward question: now what? And now mom accepts me, and there's not all churches, but a lot of churches are embracing us, and yeah, I still feel this shame. So all this time I've been blaming Pat Robertson,
Right.
but it turns out I've been sort of gay bashing myself quite a bit too. And so now that we've made these great political strides and external strides in changing hearts and minds, I feel like the next step is like changing our own heart and mind about how we feel about ourselves, about not looking in the mirror and saying just awful things.
Right.
I mean, if I said to you what I sometimes say to myself in the mirror, you probably wouldn't want to be having this conversation with me right now.
Absolutely. And, I'm one of those that's pretty dang transparent. So, I mean, I woke up this morning in a space of, I don't really want to freaking do this anymore, whatever this was. And it was a lot of things. It's like, I don't want to do podcasting anymore. I don't want to write articles anymore because I'm not feeling like I'm good enough. I'm not being where I need to be in my life. And then when I finally got over my pity party, and then of course I walked in front of the mirror, and on top of that, you're still fat. So, it was like all this stuff built up, and then I went to the gym, and I kind of let the fuming shame and stuff kind of just get going. And I mean, I worked out quick and I worked out hard. 30 minutes, I was like sweating like a dog, and people were looking at me like, okay, what's wrong with this guy? He's either high or he's angry, which was probably the closer thing, being a little angry. But I realized in that moment, had I not given myself that permission to go like really just be in this space with myself, I couldn't have moved forward. But you're right, the things we say to ourselves so often, and especially those who are listening to this, you're going to say some pretty ugly stuff to yourself before, during, and after you come out of the closet. So let's just be truthful about that. But you also get to choose when you do that. And I think that's kind of the point that you're making, is when we choose not to be that way with ourselves, we kind of tell shame and guilt to go screw off, because that's not part of who we are. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle that we often miss, is if we don't beat ourselves up so much, then we learn how to not let how other people beat us up affect us quite as deep either.
Yeah, when I teach people to meditate, I often use an example of a plane taking off from San Francisco flying to New York. And it's got a flight plan that gets it to New York. But if you look at the flight records, it's almost never on course. It's always drifting off course, and then the pilot or the navigational system is saying, oh, we're so many degrees off course to the north, and bringing it back. And you wouldn't want me flying a plane, trust me, but this is my simplistic understanding. Sure. And, maybe 1% of the time it's actually on course, and yet it gets to New York. Mm-hmm. And that's what meditation is like. It's about continually returning to the breath, recognizing when you've become distracted and coming back to the breath. And I think the same is true for addressing guilt and shame, any guilt and shame for anyone, but particularly those of us who are LGBT, to say, oh, there I go again. I've drifted off course. I've drifted into this negative talk. I don't have to beat myself up more for the negative talk. I just need to come back to center. I need to remind myself that this is not helping anyone. It's not helping me. It's not helping my brothers and sisters. It's not furthering anything. I just need to let it go and come back. Let it go and come back. And we do get there. It's but if we're attached to perfection, perfect, like I'm going to wake up one day and it'll all be gone. It'll all be fine. Then we're just going to get more and more depressed because it's probably not going to happen.
So let's talk a little bit about that perfection piece, because I get into this conversation quite a bit with people, whether I'm working with them coming out or entrepreneurs going through their stuff, and I try to help them get back to center in who they are. This perfection piece just shows up everywhere. we got to have the perfect podcast. We have to have the perfect blog. We have to have the perfect business. We have to, lead the perfect yoga class or meditation. What is something you feel like can really help people get away from that perfection stuff in a very healthy way?
Well, I think if we look at nature, nature is perfect in its imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
The things that make a tree strong are adversity, and the same is true for animals, evolution, you name it. Imperfection is, and the bumping up against those challenges are what strengthen us. And so we, rather than treating those experiences of imperfection as, oh wow, I failed miserably, I'll never be any good. It's like, wow, I just bumped up against something. It's a chance to grow. It's a chance to learn. I also think that from a spiritual perspective, all meditation, whether it's body-centered like yoga, tai chi, or seated meditation or centering prayer, it's all about returning.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about a practice of returning, and inherent in that concept of returning to the mantra, the sensation of the body, the breath, whatever it happens to be, is the idea that you're going to become distracted. Distraction is part of the practice. It's as much a part of the practice as the mantra or the breath or the sensation of the body. So if we bring that out into life, and that of course is why we call it a practice,
mm-hmm.
because we're practicing for the real world, you're going to fail. You're going to publish a book and it's going to have a typo in it. And you're going to notice the typo as soon as the ink dries on the printed version that shows up on Amazon, because that's the way the world works.
Right.
You're going to give a talk and you're going to say something on accident that offends somebody. I do it all the time. Give me a microphone, I'll say something offensive. I'll probably do it before the end of this podcast. It's just who we are. And, for years, we as gay men, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender people have been demanding others respect us and show us compassion and kindness. And that it's right that we do that, but offering ourselves that same level of compassion when we don't measure up. Maybe my goal is to go to the gym 6 days a week and I make it 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's 4 days I went to the gym and an opportunity for compassion on the other 2 days that I didn't quite make it. So it's reminding ourselves over and over again of those principles that we've been demanding from other people for years. And now it's time to demand them from ourselves, mm-hmm. individually.
This piece of compassion is one of the hardest things, I think, and you probably would agree, one of the hardest things for us to learn and to practice. And I don't think, many of us really get it. I see it in my mother. And I've learned to just keep my mouth shut about it because I've said my piece about it numerous times. And finally I'm just like, okay, this is just part of her vocabulary. Mm-hmm. But when I hear her say, well, I'm so stupid, I just laugh now because it is a part of her vocabulary. I don't know that she truly buys into that, but it's become a part of her being with herself. And, she'll say either that she's not very, she's stupid, or, well, I'm not the most, smart person in the room right now, da-da-da. And it's like, okay, this is because she's heard these things over and over again, and now she's made them part of herself. But what we don't often realize is even in jest, I believe, our cellular memory takes that stuff in, and the more we do absorb that, the more it can become our truth if we're not careful. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I've worked with enough people coming through the closet door to realize that the biggest shift that has to be made is in this world of compassion for self, because it's where it starts. And as hard as it may be, and I hope those that are listening really listen, to all of this podcast, but this piece right here that we're talking about, compassion, you got to love yourself, knowing that there's an outside chance that a lot of others aren't going to love you, There's a pretty good chance that a lot of people won't, but that's okay because there's going to be others who are going to step up to the plate and love you. But if we're always going external for that validation, we may end up finding ourselves always being disappointed.
Yeah.
Unless we learn to give ourselves compassion and love first.
Yeah. You know, this is, it's sort of hard to even fathom this, but if I were to say to you, Rick, you look really ugly with those 4 ears, something crazy that is just not your truth. You have 2 ears, not 4, and you know that. And you would look at me like I was delusional for saying such a crazy thing because it's not true. But if you believed you had 4 ears and I said that, then it would be hurtful. It would have real impact. So a lot of a while back on my podcast, I debated Shirley Phelps of the infamous Westboro Baptist Church, and she was kind enough to call me a faggot a few times.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's just lovely, classy lady.
Yeah.
She was actually quite nice, shockingly, but there were a few times she blurted that out. And people emailed me. I got tons of emails saying, how come that didn't upset you? And I'm like, because it's not my truth.
Right.
I mean, she can call me whatever she wants, But it took years and years and years to get to that point where that word no longer had power over me. And, but the way I got there is through the constant repetition of self-compassion and coming back to that guiding principle over and over and over again, because it is undoing the programming of my formative years in particular, but even beyond that,
right,
of being told something that's not true. And you say the sky is green long enough and people start to see the sky is green.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that compassion is the key, and compassion for others. The other reason I was able to talk to Shirley Phelps and be civil with her was not because I agreed with her, but because I really truly had compassion for her. In the same way that if I saw somebody, I was out for dinner the other night at Chipotle with my son, and there was a mentally ill man who was very delusional, and he was talking to a trash can, and my son was looking at him like, "Daddy, why is he doing that?" And I was trying to explain to my son that, sometimes our bodies get sick and sometimes our minds get sick and we get confused. And anything that he said in that delusional state, I would not hold against him. I mean, the proper response to him is compassion.
Right.
And I believe that it's a different type of mental illness, but I believe that level of hatred that someone like Shirley Phelps or any of the numerous other televangelists and lesser known people,
right,
it's a form of mental illness. It's a plague. It's a virus. And their goal is to try and infect us. Our job is to try and to provide the cure,
I love that analogy because I think we can get very caught up in, okay, let's go into defense mode. And I've been there, and it sounds like you've been there too.
Oh, yeah.
Many times, and it's taken a lot of practice, and I'm still not perfect at it, and I don't think I ever will be perfect at it. But I just spent some time with my own parents in the last week, and the old stuff started to show up, and I had to keep pulling myself back, going, just be present, just be open, just be compassionate, be curious. I think when we quit being curious, too, we don't allow for someone else to say what they need to say, so that we can hear it, and maybe we'll hear something different. It doesn't mean I'm going to change my point of view or my perspective or my belief in who I am as a gay man or who I am in many ways in my life. But I've learned when I allow myself to be curious and compassionate simultaneously, it's pretty dang hard to get really upset with someone. It's more interesting to me to be curious about, okay, so why is that Shirley Phelps really is just so much that way?
Yeah.
I wonder what really makes that happen for her. You know?
Well, the amount of energy it takes. I mean, she's disowned some of her children because they were raised in the church, and then when they got old enough to think for themselves, they decided that was not where they wanted to be, and she disowned them. And I think that there's a just like we have a biological impulse to be gay, and to deny that is hell. I mean, that is the definition of hell.
Right.
To have that truth and deny it. I think there's a biological imperative to love and accept and embrace your children unconditionally. And so for her to go against that biological imperative is got to be just awful. I can't think of anything worse.
Well, and I think you and I both know, because you do yoga. I don't do yoga at the level that you do, but I've done enough yoga and meditations. I'm a consistent meditator, that the amount of stress that you put into yourself when you're in those biological frenzies of, why doesn't somebody get me? Why can't you understand my point of view? You need to, you already said we have fought really hard as a community to bring things to a certain space, and I get people hating me when I say what I'm about to say, but sometimes I feel like we've fought so hard that we haven't kept the dialogue open, and then we get all frenzied, and then everybody's stressed. Yeah. Yet when we actually say, okay, I'm going to try to get you, and maybe I'm on this roll because it's something, a new movement I'm rolling out, but I want to get that there's a lot about us that are the same. Even the Shirley Phelps, there's a lot about us. We're a lot alike. But there's also the differentness in us. And in that differentness is where the beauty and the magic happens. And when we can start to embrace that as a humanity, and as we can embrace that our sexuality is part of our differentness, but it isn't the only thing that makes us different. And when we can see that in each other and embrace that, okay, we're the same in this realm, we're different in this realm, but because of that sameness and that differentness, that's what makes us one. That what makes us one as a person, and what makes us one as a human race. I think my gut feeling says if we could get that, there would be a lot less stress in the world. And I can only imagine if we were able to go look inside the Shirley Phelpses of the world and go, okay, let's measure the stress and the anxiety that perpetuates within that human form that she lives within. I think we'd be really shocked at how much stress there is.
I agree, and I think that, like in a to a lesser degree, you talk about visiting your parents or anybody that sort of pushes your buttons. I mean, they always say, your parents push your buttons because they're the ones that put them there.
Right.
So if you think you're enlightened, just go visit your parents. But but I really think if we can stop, and that's the beauty of various spiritual practices like meditation, is when we can stop. We don't have to stop for a long time, but just hit the pause button and the mute button, even for a split second. We have the opportunity to see beyond the screaming and the yelling and the internal dialogue that keeps us from seeing what is there. Where one minute you're seeing your mother as this pain in the neck who doesn't get you, who uses words like stupid all the time.
Right.
And then in the very next moment, because you took a breath and you stepped back and you looked at it differently, you see this woman who is asking for love and afraid she's not going to get it. And that, to me, that's the miracle. That's that internal shift. And the beauty, for me at least, is that when that happens within myself, when I am able to see someone like Shirley Phelps or my mother or father or anybody with a little more of the light of truth shown on the situation, I also see it in myself. Yeah. But as long as I'm engaged in that battle with them, I never win.
Right.
Even if I win the argument externally, like prove that Shirley Phelps is an idiot and everybody should dislike her, that's setting the bar pretty low for success. Right. She's pretty much doing all the lifting for me.
Right.
But even if I get that, I'm still miserable because I've engaged in a cat fight, and what if I've come out stressed and miserable?
Right. What are you going to get from that? This piece that you just brought up about asking for love and not going to get it, I see that as one of the core human pinnacles of why there's so much stress and
Yeah.
and debate and I'm better than you is because at the end of the day, and I hate that phrase, but I think it fits really good here, all we all want is love. And when we can't get it, we get scared.
Yeah.
We get very scared.
Yeah, and I think in the gay community, and I'm realizing this, the older I get, the more I realize this, that we have sort of deluded ourselves into thinking more sex is more love. Our straight brothers and sisters have similar but different paradigms that they tend to buy into. But do we want more sex, more partners, more kink, more this, more that? Or do we want more intimacy? And I think for most people, the answer is more intimacy. And we haven't really quite figured out how to ask for it and find it. And so we go partner to partner, grinder to scruff, you know, whatever. And I'm not saying those things are bad. I mean, I have a grinder account.
Right.
I have a scruff account. And you know what? I haven't found a lot of intimacy on either, but I haven't deleted the app. So there you go.
And I think that's the thing is getting very clear. And I think this is a movement I'm seeing definitely within the gay culture, especially within the gay male culture. So I'm going to caveat it by saying that. I think a lot of gay men, and I'm kind of in the early 50s range, but I'm seeing it in the late 30s up through the 40s, they're starting, and even the younger guys, I'm starting to see more younger guys really reach this point too. If you ask them what they really want, a 5-second, literally a 5-second blowjob, so to speak, would not be the thing they want. They want that 1 hour or 2 hours of intimate conversation, some nice holding and touching, and it may not even be any physical thing, just holding space for one another to say, here I am, do you see me and do you get me? And I think sometimes as gay men, and again I'm caveating this as a gay men thing, I think we are very afraid of becoming that vulnerable and opening that doorway because, oh my God, what if somebody really hears me say, yeah, I don't really want to hook up, I'd rather just go have a nice quiet conversation with you and really get to know you. But it's very scary to say something like that.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate kink.
Right, it is. It is, because you put yourself out there on the limb and you suddenly are in a shade of gray that didn't even get covered in the books, so to speak.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, it's sort of telling that we're very comfortable with drag in all its forms, playing dress up, putting on costumes. We're really great at that.
Right.
But are we really good at taking our costumes off? And I'm all for putting on costumes. I'm all for drag. But I think that being able to stand there and be spiritually, emotionally, mentally naked, not just physically naked, is key. I mean, you mentioned my naked yoga classes. Currently, they're on hold, by the way. I found being a dad was very time-consuming. Who knew?
Think?
But I remember the first naked yoga class, and I go to nude beaches and have done nude modeling and art classes, and I'm not shy. I'm not modest at all. But I remember the first time I stood in front of a yoga class to teach naked, and I realized that everybody in that room was staring at me. And I mean, yoga is such that it's a very intimate experience by its very nature. And here I was naked and not having a perfect body. I mean, I have a nice body. It's healthy. I'm very happy with it. But Abercrombie still hasn't called.
Right.
I keep waiting by the phone, and they haven't called and asked me to model for them yet.
Right.
And it was only a moment, and then it started, and then little by little, men would come up and they would talk to me after class, and they'd say, that was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. And what was funny is some of them were porn stars. Some are, It wasn't like they were shy about taking off their clothes, but becoming truly vulnerable was terrifying. Getting fucked senseless on video for the whole world to see, no big deal.
Yeah, that's
taking off your clothes and being vulnerable, that is something wholly different. And
So this is interesting, and this literally just happened last night. So we have a local porn star in our neighborhood. Yes, here in Riverside, California, we do have a porn star living here. And
Is it you?
no, it's not me, unfortunately. Well, maybe I could be in somebody's fantasy, I guess. But there are bear porn stars, so there we go. But so Cody Cummings actually lives in our neighborhood. So those of you who have been around, like Darren and I, will probably well know that name. But go look it up, and you'll see who he is. And what's so interesting is I've seen him around several times, and then I started seeing him around with a gal, and then not long ago I saw him with a gal at a baby stroller. And I was working with a client at Starbucks last night. We work out in an outdoor area by a fountain and everything, and here comes Cody Cummings, which I know that's not his real name, that's his porn name, but he comes pushing the stroller with his little girl. Now, my client is totally crazy about Cody Cummings. And I said, so I have a special treat for you for your session tonight. I invited Cody Cummings to come to your session and work with you today. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, turn around. And what I found so interesting is even though he wasn't anywhere close to us, the moment that my client turned around, and I tried to not look simultaneously simply because I didn't want to make him feel on the spot, but I could feel the vulnerability that started to happen to him. Like, oh my gosh, these two guys are staring at me. They know. And because he has a very distinctive tattoo on his neck that says family, it's kind of hard to hide that, given the fact that you've been naked and, getting fucked by some guy, or he's done both gay and straight porn. But I found the vulnerability so interesting to watch unfold. And as if we were going to expose him. Yet it's like, okay, buddy, you've been exposed to the world, so to speak. So, and I think that's a really great place, because we got to kind of wrap up here. But I think that's a really good place to talk about that final piece of why do you think we're very afraid of being exposed in our lives? I mean, you've dealt with it, I've dealt with it, but what is that thing about being exposed that really scares us?
Yeah. Yeah, in San Francisco, well, I mean, as my notoriety has increased, I'm not Cody Cummings level notoriety, but,
Right.
As I've written books and my podcast and, my yoga classes, I mean, a lot of people know who I am now, and
Right.
I will get reactions like that sometimes when I'm out and about, and I even see it projected onto my son, like this assumption that he's some great yogi because I'm his dad.
Right.
He'll probably go on to be a born-again Christian or something, but just because the universe has a sense of humor.
Oh, yes, she does.
But yeah, it's interesting that I put myself out there, and yeah, it can feel very, very overwhelming sometimes. Like, wow, these people are staring at me now. What do I do?
I feel that too, and again, like you, I'm not on any high realm of notoriety, but I've had enough of my own exposures that there are moments when I'm in certain places, and I was just in one of those places a few weeks ago, in the room of 3,500 people, and at the first break, I went out. I wasn't on the stage; I was participating, and this lady walked up to me and said, I know you. You're that guy that does that Coming Out podcast. And people around me started looking at me, and it was like, okay, wow, this is kind of scary. I don't know you from anyone, and it wasn't the kind of venue that I would normally, it wasn't a gay and lesbian event. It was like a very entrepreneurial event. And I had to take a deep breath in myself and go, okay, this is what this is about. The more I do this, the more I keep putting myself out there. And, I've been on national TV. It's like, wow, I've always got to be kind of present to those moments, to be willing to say, okay, I am here and I need to be present with this, and just go with it. And I think if we parallel that to the coming out process, I know one of my pieces of advice to people all the time is be present with where you're at. Be very present with it. And if you can be present with what's happening in that moment and not rush ahead to the future, not look to the past, and just be present with what's going on right then and there, your guidance will come to you in ways that you really, literally have never anticipated could have helped you. So this being the Coming Out Lounge, and I know you've done lots of work in lots of different ways, but what would be one piece of advice you would like to leave the listeners with about their coming out journeys that you think could really help them?
What I would say is, in every instance of coming out, not just about my sexuality, but every time I've stood in my truth or embraced my truth and let the world see my truth, um, I have been met. The fear I had before I stepped out of the closet door was overwhelmed by the joy and the relief I felt when I actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been such a consistent theme in my life. When I found out I was positive, same thing. I felt all this guilt and shame. How could I let this happen to myself? And what will people think? And when I finally just started being open about it,
Right.
what I found was that no one was judging me. I'm sure some people are, and who cares
Sure.
about them?
Right.
But, for the most part, I was met with incredible amounts of love and support. And even when I wasn't, it was okay. Because my heart was so light. And I think that is what I would say to people. That it may seem hard to believe now if you're in the closet, any closet,
Right.
but just know that when you step out, you will be relieved. And I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but there's where Cersei, who's like the evil queen, the high priest basically talks about, what will we find when we strip away your fineries, all your dark secrets. And she gets thrown in prison and has to do this naked walk of shame. And people are spitting at her, and it's just awful. But there's also this moment, this like relief that it's done, it's out, I'm free.
Mm-hmm.
That all of whatever happens when you step out, whenever you strip away those fineries and stop pretending everything's okay, you actually start to become okay.
Yep. That's a very powerful space. In fact, at this same event, somebody said something very similar, and this was a lot of world changers, people who are really out there making differences in the world, a lot of entrepreneurs. And one of the speakers said, the moment you step away from the cloak of entrepreneur and just say, this is what I'm building because I want to build it, you're going to see how much easier it is to go build what you're building. We tend to get behind these words like entrepreneur and solopreneur and world changer and world makers and all this stuff, but when we just say, this is me and this is what I'm doing and this is what I really feel like I've been meant to do, and I'm going to go build it, and I'll see where it goes. Yeah. Suddenly it's a beautiful, it is like dropping everything and being naked in our truth in a very, very beautiful way. So yeah, I think that sounds like a pretty good place for us to kind of say we're going to wrap this up here. So yeah, it's been great having you, Darren. I would love for you to share, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you? What's your
Probably
website?
The easiest way is through my website, which is darrenmain.com, or I'm on Facebook and Twitter and all the other social avenues.
Right. Cool.
I would like to say one thing before we wrap up, and that is thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really, the more I've gotten familiar with your work, the more profoundly impressed I am with you, and I hope that on the mornings, just remember next time you wake up on a morning when you're thinking about not podcasting or saying to heck with it, you give me a call. I'm going to remind you how important it is, the work you're doing. Because I can assure you, every podcast you do, there's one person out there hearing it whose life you're changing. And
I think that's something all of us need to realize. We may not feel like we're doing something that matters, but I can tell you this, that even a smile at someone walking down the street may be the smile that shifts them into a better space, if even just for that little bit of time. And I think sometimes we as humans forget, you don't have to be on a stage, you don't have to have a podcast, you don't have to have written a book or been on a national TV show to have impact. In fact, some of the most impactful people are the ones who haven't done any of that. And I think I feel blessed, and I know you do, because we kind of had this conversation. I feel blessed that we've been given the opportunities to do what we get to do and enjoy getting to do it. And I would encourage those who don't get these opportunities to realize they've got an opportunity that they're doing, that somebody else is looking at them going, I wish I had that opportunity. So just keep doing what you're doing in the world, and we will somehow always make the world a better place. So if you have all really enjoyed our conversation today between Darren and I, please go check out his website. Again, it's darrenmain.com, and that's M-A-I-N. I want to make sure everybody gets that. And just go look at the beautiful books he's written, see some of the workshops he does. Beautiful story about himself. I've read through it a couple of times in preparation for this. I just love the story he has on his site. But if there's something that you've really taken away from this chance that you've got to spend with us today, we'd love it if you would hop into iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this and just give us a little love. You don't have to like paint the world of beauty for us, but a little love always helps us here in podcast world. Also, if you'd like to find either one of us, I'm on Facebook as the Coming Out Coach. Darren Main, he's got his Facebook too. We both got Twitters, so you can catch me at Rick Clemens. You can catch Darren at Twitter as well, and just connect with us, even if it's just a connection, just to say, hey, thanks for what you do, or hey, I'm really struggling. It doesn't have to be a big thank you. You can come to either one of us and go, here's what's going on for me. And with that, as I always do, I'm going to say I always want to remind everyone to go out there and just keep stepping out, stepping up, and stepping into living your powerful truth, whatever that powerful truth is for you, on the other side of the closet doors. I'm Rick Clemens, the host of the Coming Out Lounge, and with that, we're going to wrap it up and say have a great week, and we'll be right back here with you in just, probably less than 7 days. So have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today with the Coming Out Lounge with your host, Rick Clemens. Make sure you tune in with us next week, same time, same place, for the Coming Out Lounge.